Welcome to Principles Only, an occasional show where we just have the two of us. And the we're going to talk about changes in the Israeli political equation, which could give some reason for optimism. With the reason why I'm saying that, as Martin will explain, I think you speak Hebrew and you're very well connected into the Israeli political situation, is that leading many leading people in the military class in Israel and top politicians and journalists have signed a joint appeal or something against Netanyahu. And you'll explain the detail. I'll just say that I used to think that revolutions were carried out by, the doughty working class waving their banners, the candlestick makers, the bakers, the smiths, and the Smiths are not the wordsmiths, if you like. Um, and that they toppled the palace and it was ruled by the working class. It's not like that at all in history. I mean, even the famous Bolshevik Revolution was more of a coup than a revolution. It was carried out by insiders. And if there is going to be change in Israel and other disobliging regimes, it's more likely to come from inside the military, among progressive parts of the military, but it's certainly among the sort of elite political class and not from the Israeli population. So, tell us what you're going to tell us, Marty, and are the possibility? Can we be optimistic that Netanyahu's rule is slowly coming towards an end?
No, we can't be optimistic, Billy. I mean, I'm very fatalistic about this, but there are paradoxes here. A Russian friend of mine cautioned me wisely about events. This was in Russian politics 25 years ago under Yeltsin. And there was some liberal fellow, appeared to be a liberal fellow, liberal in the best sense of the word, pro-democratic, pro-Western, and I was all for him for those reasons. And my friend, who was a hard-drinking Russian journalist, we must go backwards, cautioned me about this. And he said, on a visit to Washington, I've seen what you've written, Marty. Don't go on a limb for this fellow. So and so is not who he appears to be. And my friend's point was that this guy was actually something you and I are very familiar with in Britain as a supposed reformer and maybe an anti-Burnham type or John Healey type, who's very much a creature of the deep state, but knows how to, or a Tony Blair type, who knows how to present himself in progressive, enlightened terms that dumb, naive people in London and Washington and New York will fall for. And I thought my friend was going over the top, but I kept an eye on this fellow. He talked about the prominent politician whose career eventually went downhill, but he had his time in the spotlight. And it was exactly the way my friend said. This politician eventually made his accommodation with Putin's people and became a loyal, apparent critic of Putin who could be relied upon to fold and do what Putin wanted to. We have equivalents in America. Of course, Bernie Sanders is a classic example of this. He's a total phony. And even AOC, Alexandra Cortez, there's a lot of skepticism against her among principled people of the far left as well as the far right for the same reason. Now, what we're seeing in Israel is something different. And it's something you've just talked about. And I think for several series of shows for us, because this goes back a long way. As you say, the Bolshevik Revolution and the Menshevik Revolution before it were only possible after the Tsar had lost control of his own armies after endless catastrophic defeats. And the key people in these cases is not the rank and file soldiers. The key people is the officer class who commands the soldiers. These are the key players. This was true in the French Revolution. So many senior French officers had served with the French army and navy supporting the American colonists and were deeply influenced by American ideas and came back determined to implement them in France. So French history took a very different course. But the revolution of 1789 was only possible because Louis XVI, who was a liberal, well-meaning reformer in his own term, in terms of France in those days, he was a well-meaning man, but he was a twit. And he had no conception he had lost his army. The same thing happened in Iran in 1978-79. The Shah had lost control of his own officer corps and officer class. And as it turned out, the Islamist fundamentalists had been infiltrating both the rank and file of the army as well as the senior officer corps of the army for years before that. And both the Iranian Savak, the murderous secret police, were so focused on terrorizing their general population, they didn't realize the disgust that was rising against them in their own conventional military. And once the conventional military refused to move against Ayatollah Khomeini's mass movement of millions of people in the streets, they could have, but they refused to. And then even Savak was powerless. We saw the same thing with the collapse of communism in 1989. Is this happening in Israel? No, I don't believe it is, but something else is happening. Just in the past, today, this is Monday, July 27th. Is that, do I have the date correct? At
Yeah.
my age, I don't. Yes, I see in the small print, I do have the date correct. The Times of Israel, an excellent English language open source media, ranks with Haaretz as the two very best English language journalistic sources on Israel, whatever your political views are, reported that hundreds of former senior military and security officers, not a few, not a handful, not dozens, not 100, but hundreds in plural, had signed an open letter to President Trump calling on President Trump to restrain Prime Minister Netanyahu when they meet on July 28th, which they may have already done by the time our podcast goes out, to force him to crack down on right-wing Jewish settler violence against Palestinians on the West Bank. Now, this is unprecedented. Many of these individuals have openly been critical of Netanyahu over many years. There have been protests over many years. But to address a protest of this power, not to the Prime Minister of Israel, not to President Chaim Herzog of Israel, who has to be apolitical but is widely known to be a moderate who loathes the crackdown again and destruction of democratic processes in Israel, which Netanyahu and his allies have systematically pushed for the past 4 years. But to address this to a president of the United States and to Netanyahu's great friend, because Trump is without question the most uncritically pro-Israel president of the United States in the most extreme sense we have seen, well, at least since Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan was perfectly ready to rein in Menachem Begin on many occasions. So we have never had an American government so committed to right-wing extremists in Israel as we do today. And this has a profound effect in Israel because I know a lot of anti-Semites out there and people who don't think of themselves as anti-Semites, but simply regard the term as Zionist as equivalent with Nazi, which it is not. There are, and I don't mean to belittle the horrific and monstrous slaughter in Gaza, which, as you know, I, like you, have completely condemned since it started. And it started was permitted under President Joe Biden in America. Actually, President Trump stopped the whole-scale slaughter. There's still monstrous activities and overreactions and killings and terrible hardships of the people in Gaza going on. But the slaughter that killed up to 75,000 people, the final total, there are higher level estimates up to 200,000. We have still no way of knowing what they are. But that went on without pause under Biden. Even it was too much for even Trump, and he reined it in. But there is something else going on. We now know, thanks to the outstanding reporting of Jon Snow and Maggie Haberman at the New York Times. I never thought I would be saying nice things about the current generation of New York Times reporters, but they have first-class people there too, and those two are simply the best there could possibly be. They exposed a story, and it was very clear that the top-level people in Trump's own cabinet were talking to them freely. Because Trump ignored his own director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe. He ignored his own vice president, the very able and shrewd J.D. Vance. He ignored his own Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who is usually seen as a complete supporter of Israel and a very strong neocon. And even Rubio agreed with Vance and Ratcliffe that the assurance they were given, declare war in Iran, kill the Iranian leadership, it'll all be over in 4 days. This was not just wicked, it was stupid. But the latest developments look good, but really are not, because hundreds of people signed this letter. So it sounds like the entire military establishment is turning on Netanyahu. But they're the old military establishment. They're the military establishment who always despised and distrusted Netanyahu and carried through his policies reluctantly with their nose held high. And they are retired, all of them. Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben Gvir have systematically replaced these people with much harder liner younger people. And if a military coup were to come, God forbid, in Israel, it would more likely come from hardline religious nationalist true believers who believe the Messiah is about to become. There is even a movement in Israel among ultra-Orthodox Jews, not all of them, but many of them, acclaiming Netanyahu himself as the Messiah. There are Jewish traditions that there are to be two Messiahs. It's not clear-cut like the Christian tradition. This is a very different tradition. The Messiah in both cases are human beings. They're not God-level beings, though in terms of the second one, that is obscured. There are lots of different arguments on this, endlessly, which are harmless if they're simply arguments and confined to the religious sphere. But there is a movement that says the first Messiah, who may eventually die in battle heroically, but will defeat all of Israel's enemies before then, is Mr. Netanyahu. Now, we don't know how many people believe this. It's certainly more than a few hundred or a few thousand. It's much more than that. It's not millions either. But you only need a few thousand people to believe this kind of poisonous, dangerous nonsense to destroy democracy. Because if people believe this, they will feel justified in assassinating critics of Mr. Netanyahu, like my good self, and maybe you eventually by association with me, or much more likely, critics in Israel. And there are critics in Israel. Netanyahu's in a re-election campaign. And who is the main challenger for him? Who's regarded as the most formidable challenger he's had in many years. And he's a good man and a nice man, but for those very reasons, I personally don't think he can succeed. But he's a former general and head of chief of staff of they call it Ramatkal, Hebrew for chief of staff, of Tsar, the Israeli Defense Forces, the Bahagana, the Israel. He's General Gadi Eisenkot. And he's a very tragic figure because his own son was one of the more than 1,000 Israeli soldiers who was killed fighting Hamas in Gaza and inflicting enormous civilian casualties as a result. So Netanyahu has now lost more Israeli soldiers in Gaza than Israel lost conquering the West Bank, the Golan Heights, Gaza, and Sinai in 6 days in 1967. This, more than anything else, shows you the relative decline in Israeli military striking power, vis-a-vis even Hamas.
Yeah.
And they've been much more effective against Hezbollah and when they've had airstrikes against Iran. But it's a familiar story that very fine American military analysts like Colonel G.I. Wilson and others, and our old friend Colonel Doug McGregor and Major Don Vandergriff, a regular guest on our show, regularly point out. Militaries are configured like the US military. They can perform very well against conventional other militaries. But if you put them in the wrong kind of war, that they don't have the doctrine or combat experience of, they will fail badly. The Israelis were very good 50 years ago at conquering cities, even with high civilian cost in life. But they could do it fast. They demolished Beirut and they drove the PLO out of Beirut. They drove the PLO more than 1,000 miles west to Tunisia to escape them in 1982-83. When the Palestinians under Arafat thought they could do a good job, Hamas has done a much more effective job surviving against them this time. This is a different Israeli generation militarily.
Right.
They're not remotely as good as they used to be.
Can I just summarize because it's sprawling a little bit? So what you've got this apparently good news situation where a lot of military types are opposing Netanyahu is not so, because if you look at their ages, they're all over retirement age and they're out of position.
Yes.
The young officers who are ones who usually do carry out revolutions and revolts and coups, the young officer class, they've been repopulated those ranks with far right, if you like, extremely nationalistic people. So if there is going to be a coup, it's going to be against Netanyahu for not being severe enough. So in
No, no,
fact,
he's very severe. No, if there is a coup, it will be Netanyahu and his allies to stamp out what is left of free speech and
right.
democracy and
So
opposition in
so
Israel.
in
It
this
will
guy,
be Netanyahu.
so okay, so they're supporting Netanyahu. They don't think Netanyahu's too far right. He's good enough for them. But the danger is the opposition to Netanyahu. There's elections coming this autumn. This IDF general, whose name just remind me, his son died in fighting in Gaza, and is he the kind of liberal alternative?
Yes, he
And
is.
and you're implying that he's in danger of assassination from some member of this extremist officer
Oh, yes,
class.
definitely. If it looks
Right,
like he's winning, they assassinated Rabin in
right.
1995
Okay, I
when
get
Rabin
you.
had made a
All right,
private deal with Hafez Assad of Syria
right, right,
in return for peace with Syria.
right.
And Rabin's own right-hand man,
Mm,
Itamar Rabinovich, his top foreign policy advisor, has confirmed that the secret deal and agreement had been reached between Assad and Rabin back then.
right.
General Eisenkot was a moderate. He hasn't changed his political views before his son was killed, and he's not a softie. He would be
But,
ruthless against
to
Hamas
put it very
too.
simply, he's
But
the best hope
yeah,
for Israeli peace in the
yes,
Middle
he
East,
would
and he
look for
might
a
be in danger of
political settlement
assassination.
because he recognizes the
Right,
army is being ground down. The
right, okay,
army is exhausted.
right,
The Israeli army is exhausted. Morale is very
all right.
poor. Record numbers of Israelis are refusing to serve in the army or
Mm,
going overseas. It hasn't reached epidemic levels yet, but it is growing, especially among the more senior people who are the combat veterans you need to train and lead and protect the younger soldiers. The younger ones who believe it's more important to read Jewish religious textbooks in battle and carry out ritual traditional functions, very nice and cozy, and can be very positive in domestic terms. But when you're at war and in combat situations, these are the people who get killed first
right.
and in much higher numbers. Uh, but it is changing. But the key point here is these ex-officers are calling on America, even on Trump, to rein Israel in. But Trump will not rein Israel in for two reasons. First, because his MAGA base is so Christian Zionist and worships Netanyahu.
Mm,
For them, Netanyahu is like Louis XIV. L'état c'est moi. The state is me.
mm,
Hitler took years to turn
right,
Germany this way, to make the state indescribable from the one guy who maybe, even if he's a maniac, or even if he's not a maniac, but a total criminal incompetent who doesn't have a clue what he's doing, which really does fit Mr. Netanyahu very well. And uh, uh, a further fact happens. Trump wobbles on Netanyahu, but whenever Netanyahu meets him, Netanyahu weaves his magic spell, and the two of them are very comfortable with each other. They create a third person,
mm,
a third personality,
yeah.
something we have known
Um,
since the time of Freud in psychology. And they
yeah.
strengthen each other's worst tendencies. It's much worse than even Nixon and Kissinger. Much worse even than that. And they knocked over countries and
Okay.
democracies like Chile
So,
like
so,
ninepins.
so what we've got is the possibility we've got various forces. We've got the old guys who oppose Netanyahu, and then we've got the political opposition, who is a reasonable guy. But of course, you've got the Zionists in America. You've got Trump, who is, as you said, creates a third personality together with Netanyahu and will never rein him in. And then you've got these extremist youngsters in the military who might even assassinate anyone who tries to do a Rabin and create a peace in the Middle East. We've got to wind up there, Marty. Could you just tell us when
Of
is this
course,
election and what are the polls saying about the various players?
it's in the fall, and because Israel has this appalling proportional representation system, just like Weimar Germany did in the 1920s. I mean, can you? Think about that. Uh, uh, the country that tipped out of a failed democracy into Nazism had a well-meaning idealistic democratic system that failed disastrously. And when Israel was created only 3 years after the war, they used the same catastrophic failed democratic model
Right,
because the politicos, except for
right,
David Ben
right,
Gurion, who was overruled, couldn't see ahead. But one
right,
last crucial point. I believe Gadi Eisenkot is a good man and would be a welcome
right.
change as prime minister. But I would rather see someone like Naftali Bennett, who's been a successful Israeli
Right.
prime minister, because
Okay.
Eisenkot is a loser. He
Mm.
plays the game according to the rules, and he never cheats, and he always loses. He
And if he's not,
always
and if he
falls.
were to win, he might be assassinated. So in 6 months' time,
Possibly,
January the first,
even if not, he
2027.
won't be. He won't win because he plays the game
Right.
straight. And
Okay.
Netanyahu was already playing dirty tricks against him,
All right. So
accusing him
January
of
the
being a
first,
traitor.
2027. Who's going to be Prime Minister of Israel? What's your prediction?
Net- Netanyahu.
Netanyahu. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Another brilliant exposition of what's really going on in that small but important country in the Middle East. Thank you so much, and see you tomorrow.